Hi there, folks. Let me full screen this. So, the plan today, everyone, is for me to try and get through this a bit quicker. I know it can be a bit long-winded. So, what I've done is I've banged a pre-workout, which has put me on a timeline to get this finished before my face starts etching off me. So today's module 2 is all about the non-conscious drivers of obesity. And so this refers to what many people think of the main driver of obesity is people being lazy or not having the willpower to make a change in their life. But there's many non-conscious drivers. This is drivers which we don't really have any control over, which have huge impacts upon body weight. And it's not just a driver of obesity, it's a driver of body weight in general and body shape. So we're going to start off though with the total daily energy expenditure and calculating your calories. We're also going to do a wee bit on energy density and preloads, and then we're going to start to move on to non-conscious drivers, which would be the lipostat, threat response system, stress and eating behavior, the HPA axis, genetics, circadian biology, circadian desynchrony, and then some suggested reading. So let's get rocking. Okay, so total TDEE and calculating calories. So TDEE is total daily energy expenditure. This is the amount of calories that you burn throughout the day. All right, so the full expenditure throughout the day. So the TDEE is then made up of separate components. So the first one you may have heard of is BMR. So you might have seen BMR calculators online. This is your basal metabolic rate. This is the rate of just your metabolism. And so this relates to keeping your body alive, keeping your temperature where it needs to be, keeping your heart pumping, keeping your lungs working, keeping your digestive system functioning. All the things necessary for survival is included in the BMR. It requires energy, and as you can see, this part of your total daily energy expenditure is the biggest portion of your calorie expenditure. All right, so 70% of your calorie burn comes from just keeping your body alive. Next up then is NEAT. So NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Thermogenesis just relates to your metabolism. So it's talking about the burn of your metabolism. So non-exercise activity thermogenesis, if you look at the wee graph here, you can see that it makes up about 15% of your total calorie burn. So 15% of this calorie burn of your total calorie burn is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So what is that? That is all the wee movements that you do which aren't exercise. So that would be fidgeting. That would be things like running your hands through your hair, scratching your nose. You know, when you're talking and you're using your hands. These are all components of NEAT. And again, this makes up 15% of your total daily energy expenditure. So all the calories that you burn, NEAT makes up roughly 15% of them. TEF then, which you would have went through which you would have mentioned, in module 1. This is the thermic effect of food. So this is the fact that food obviously contains energy, contains calories in the form of energy, but your body has to extract those calories out of it, and the process of extraction actually costs calories. So your body has to burn some calories in order to extract the calories out of food. Now, you always get more calories out of the food than you burn. Otherwise, you could eat yourself to starvation. But some foods have a higher TEF, a thermic effect, than others. So protein, for example, your body has to burn approximately 30% more calories in the extracting of calories out of food, and it's the same with fiber too. So as you can see, the thermic effect of food accounts for about 10% of our total daily calorie burn. And then finally, it's exercise, activity, thermogenesis, eat. So this is the exercise that you do. So the things that you track on your watch whenever you're doing your workout, that is your exercise, activity, thermogenesis. Now just have a look at that. So look, you see all the output that you track? It's only 5% of your calorie burn. All right. So all of this stuff, your TEF, your NEAT, your BMR, this is the majority. This is 95% of where your calories are spent. It's on non-activity based things. All right. So that is why doing exercise alone generally isn't enough for weight loss. And that is always a bit surprising to people at how little calorie burn actually comes from exercise. So how do we calculate the calories? Well, there's two formulas. So the Harrison-Benedict equation is the oldest of the two. It's the one that we used to use. I think it's about 100 years old, roughly. And the way they would have worked that out is exactly what you see there. They would have worked out the BMR. They would have worked out the BMR by for men, taking the number 88.3 and adding it to 13.397 times your weight in kg, plus 4.799 times height in centimeters, minus 5.677 times your age, and then the woman's one you can read. Don't ask me how they work them numbers out, but that is how you work out your BMR. Now, that has since changed to the Mifflin-St. equation, and this is the equation now. If you go online and you look for a BMR calculator, it'll be using the Mifflin-St. one, just because it's more accurate than the Harrison-Benedict. Both of these equations are approximations, so there's none that's perfectly accurate. You have to do a bit of experimenting after you work out your BMR to actually get it accurate, and you do that through weighing, through trying a calorie intake and seeing what happens to your weight. But just so you know the equations, and if you wanted to work it out for yourself, this is what you would do. So if you were a man, you would take your weight in kilos, you would times it by 10, and you would plus it to your height in centimeter times by 6.25, and then you would minus 5 times your age plus 5. All right, that would give you your BMR. Then what you would do is you would look at this activity multiplier, and whatever the result of your BMR calculation is, you would then make a judgment about your exercise. So whether you're sedentary, light active, moderately active, or very active, and you would multiply your BMR figure by whatever activity level you typically do. And that is how you would work out your TDEE. All right, now you can get these calculators online where you just put in your information and it'll do it all for you, and that's what MyFitnessPal does. All right, MyFitnessPal just works out your BMR. As soon as you enter in your weight, your height, and your age, MyFitnessPal gives you your BMR. So I was just putting that on, just if you ever want to do that for yourself, that is how it's done, and that's how MyFitnessPal calculates it, and that's how BMR and TDEE calculators do it online. Energy density, right? So this concept is something that you see a lot as a coach when people first join. So this is a few quotes from clients. So now that I'm tracking, I realize I only probably eat about 1,300 calories a day. I don't know how I've gained so much weight. Or this is more food than I would normally eat. How can I lose weight eating more? So this is about energy density, and this speaks to volume of food versus volume of calories. All right, so look, before you started eating healthy, so when you join a gym, obviously you're going to start eating quote unquote healthy or clean or good or whatever label you want to put on it. Before you were doing that, you were eating high calorie foods. Typically, you were eating high calorie foods, not everybody, but in general, if you're starting the gym, you probably had a bit of weight to lose, and so you were probably eating high calorie foods. All right, so this means that you can eat a low volume of food that has high calories. All right, so you're eating a low volume of food, but it has a high amount of calories, so it's calorie dense. So there's a low volume of food, there's a high volume of calories. Now what happens when you go to the gym is you start cleaning up, you start making better food choices, and what happens is the volume of food goes up, but the calorie density goes down. So what happens is you are eating more food, but you're actually eating fewer calories. So there's a difference between amount of food and amount of calories. These aren't always the same. So just because you're eating more food doesn't mean you're eating more calories. And the fact is that calories are what is important for weight loss. So if you look at this image down here, you can see this is an image of 3 stomachs. All of these stomachs have 400 calories on them. All right, one of these stomachs, this one here full of vegetables, is going to be completely full. The consumer will be full up to the brim, and then the 400 calories of oil, the consumer won't feel satisfied at all, and it could still probably eat a full meal. But in terms of what your body's going to do with it, is it going to store fat or is it not? It's exactly the same to it. So whilst this person full of vegetables is going to feel full, and this person is going to feel not full at all, the body sees it the exact same way. So this is what we call low energy density foods and high energy density foods. And so we have to be very careful and not get confused about volume of food versus volume of calories. So don't worry if you think that you're eating too much food to lose weight, because it's all about the calories. And when you're not eating clean, remember that just because you're eating a low amount of food doesn't mean that you're not getting enough calories on, because you probably are if you're making the wrong choices. So one of the concepts around this, and they try and help people out, is preloads. And so what researchers have found is that when people preload a meal with high water or high fiber, with a small amount of fiber, 20 minutes before they actually eat their full meal, they found that overall they end up consuming less calories. So one of the tricks and tips that we would often use for weight loss is to get people to drink a pint of water about 20 minutes before their meal. And what this means is that they don't be as hungry come their meal, and they don't eat as much water, and it's actually highly effective. There's been a few studies on this technique now, and the people who drank the water have a substantial amount of weight loss compared to those who didn't. So it's a good technique. It doesn't really require any effort, and it just means that you'll eat fewer calories naturally than you typically would. So handy wee tip, and you can do this also with high fiber foods like fruit and vegetables. You can have a small portion of that before you actually eat your meal. Give your body a bit of time to process it, and then eat the meal, and you'll eat and you'll consume less. Right, okay. So the lipostat. So this is one of the non-conscious drivers of obesity that not a lot of people know about. So lipostat. So lipo for fat, and stat as in the like static. So researchers have termed this system a lipostat because it resembles a thermostat. Now the analogy isn't perfect, but it works and it drives home the point. So the same way that you would have a thermostat in your house, and you would set it to a certain temperature, and then if the temperature in the house dropped, so you set your thermostat to come on, say at 20 degrees, and when the house drops below 20 degrees, the heating knocks on and the temperature comes back up until it's above 20 degrees. And then if it goes too hot, so say it goes to 30 degrees, the air conditioning comes on and it brings it back down. So the thermostat in the house keeps the temperature of the house hovering within this state. And the body actually does something very similar to this. All of the mechanisms is called homeostasis. And so it regulates heat, it regulates the acidity of your blood, it regulates the ratio of water in your body, and it keeps them hovering at a set point, just like a thermostat would for your house. Now, it turns out that your body has something similar to this for weight. All right, and it's done through your hypothalamus, which is a region of the brain. So your hypothalamus and leptin, which you can see here. So leptin is the hormone which signals, and the hypothalamus is the orchestrator of what happens, in response to leptin levels. And so the way this works is your body has what's called an adiposity set point, and this is a fat set point. So it's the same as the way your thermostat has, you set it to a certain temperature. Your body has a fat set point that it's set at. And so if your body fat drops below that adiposity set point, then your brain thinks that you're starving. And so it'll turn on all the systems which drive weight gain. And so this is like, it'll make you feel really hungry. It'll make you crave high calorie dense foods. It'll slow down your NEAT, so all the exercise activity, thermogenesis, so all your fidgeting, your scratching, your hand movements, all that kind of stuff will slow down whenever your body fat drops below a certain level. And basically your brain is turning on its defenses against starvation. All right, and just the way that a house, a thermostat would turn on the heating, your body turns on all the cues that get you to eat more and get your body fat back up to what it feels is a safe level. Now, the problem with that is that everybody has different adiposity set points, and obese people have higher adiposity set points than lean people do. So basically, an obese person will defend a higher adiposity set point than a lean person will. And this means is that it's far more difficult for obese people to become lean than it is for a lean person to stay lean. It would be like the lean person starving. That's what it's like for an obese person. They try to lose weight. And so how does it do this? Well, the fat tissue produces a hormone called leptin, and leptin is the hormone that signals to the hypothalamus what to do. And so fat produces leptin, so fat tissue produces leptin. And if you're losing weight and your fat tissue comes down, then less leptin is produced, and your brain responds to the leptin levels. If they're lowering by turning everything on, they get you to consume more and put your body fat back up. And it also, so the way it does that is by turning on non-conscious drivers of weight gain. So it'll be things that you don't notice happening. You'll feel hungry more often. You'll not be as satisfied with food. You'll start to slow down your activity so that you're not burning as many calories. And this drives weight gain without the person being conscious of it. So obese people, what tends to happen is, what should happen, is the more leptin that is in the body, the hypothalamus, if it worked exactly like a thermostat, when that heat level goes too high and it fires on air conditioning to drop it back down, the lipostat isn't quite as effective at fighting against obesity. It's great at fighting against starvation, but it's not quite great at fighting against obesity. So it would be like a thermostat, which is great at keeping your house warm, but when it gets too warm, it's really, really shit at bringing the temperature back down. And that's how the thermostat is. So it's really, really good at fighting starvation, and it's really, really shit at fighting obesity. So what happens is, as your fat tissue comes down and leptin starts to not be produced as much, your body turns on all the systems to make you gain weight. Now, as body fat goes up and leptin levels rise, what we would want to happen is for your brain to turn on all the systems to bring it back down, but that doesn't seem to happen. And what actually happen is your body becomes what's called leptin resistant. So you might have heard that term before, leptin resistance, and it just means that what happens is instead of your body bringing the heat back down, your adiposity set point rises. So it would be like in the thermostat example, if the heat rose above 30 degrees and we would want it to come back down, instead of it coming back down, what your body does is it just raises the temperature set point up to 30 degrees. So now, if the temperature tries to drop below 30 degrees, it'll turn on the systems again to heat it up. And so this means that lean people have a lower adiposity set point that their body defends, and obese people have a higher adiposity set point that their body defends. Hope that makes sense. So there's also the threat response system. This is your flight or fight system. So stress is caused by our response to a perceived threat. In the past, these threats spell mistakes here. In the past, these threats usually presented physical danger, and our response was fight or flight. It's a very proficient system with a high fitness value. Our threat response system evolved to keep us alive in the face of danger and is very proficient at it. This system allows us to sustain high metabolic demands of dealing with a stressor. Modern day stress. So our threat response is activated at conceptual and abstract threats which aren't physically dangerous. So in the modern day, the stress response system was evolved to deal with physical dangers, but modern day stress comes in the form of abstract and conceptual threats. And so, to quote Stephen Gainey, your body is preparing to fight off a grizzly bear, even if the actual threat is an Excel spreadsheet. And so why is that relevant? Well, because stress and eating behavior are linked. Stress can cause both weight loss and weight gain. People have two responses to stress: overeating and undereating. The food environment that dictates which one it's going to be. So research has shown that the determining factor is our food environment. So if you've a healthy food environment, if you've got low calorie, low sugar, low salt, low fat foods in your food environment, and you get stressed, what typically happens is we undereat. So when our food environment is populated with healthy, high fiber, low calorie foods, we tend to undereat when stressed. And so a healthy food environment causes weight loss when stressed. An unhealthy food environment causes weight gain when stressed. When our food environment is populated with unhealthy, high sugar, high salt, high fat, high calorie foods, we tend to overeat when stressed. So the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The threat response system, which triggers CRF and causes cortisol to be produced. So again, the hypothalamus is responsible for this threat response system, as well as it's an interplay between your hypothalamus, your pituitary gland, and your adrenal glands. And so what happens is this axis, this HPA axis, it triggers something called CRF, and CRF causes a hormone called cortisol to be produced in the body. So you might have heard of cortisol before. It's a stress hormone. So CRF stands for corticotropin releasing factor, and it causes the stress hormone cortisol to be released, allowing the body to sustain high metabolic demands for a long period of time. So cortisol basically happens during fight or flight, high stress situations, and it basically takes no prisoners. It fuels your body for fight or flight. And so in the lab, CRF seemed to be a determinant factor which drives overeating during stressful events. So the reason that we're talking about this HPA axis and CRF is, hang on, did I put this in? Right, so in the lab, as I said there in that last one, it seemed to be a determinant factor. So what happened was, in the lab, we had, they tested monkeys, they got them stressed, and they provided them with high calorie foods and We had a control group of monkeys who weren't stressed and had the same diet in front of them. Now, what happened was the monkeys that were stressed would have had far more and gained far more weight than the monkeys who weren't when the food was available to them. Now, what the researchers done was they cut, so in the stressed monkeys, they cut the CRF out of, so the CRF trigger, they cut it out so that the monkeys didn't have it in their body anymore. So they were exposing the monkeys to the same stressful events, but they didn't have CRF. And what they found was that the monkeys who were stressed but didn't have CRF, and the monkeys who weren't stressed ended up being the exact same weight, and the stressed monkeys didn't eat any more than the not stressed monkeys. So CRF seemed to be the determinant factor that drove overeating during stressful events and caused a lot of weight gain. And a lot of weight gain is down to stress. And CRF is not something that you're in control of. And again, what happens is it's going to fire up all those non-conscious urges and drives to make you overeat. And guys, listen, it's not a question of willpower. It's not a question of whether or not you can defeat your biology. The biology will always win out. It's just a question of when. And so somebody who's stressed a lot more often will overeat more often. And so this is why dealing with stress is a big part of your body change journey. It has to be. There's no other way around it. Right, okay, genetics. So, the first law of behavioral genetics is that all psychological traits show significant and substantial genetic influence. So that's all psychological traits show significant and substantial genetic influence. And so there's something in genetics called the default hypothesis. And this is referring to the fact that when you're looking at any behavior and you're not sure what the driver of this behavior is, it's a safe bet to assume that it's some combination of genetics and environment. So it's a safe bet to assume that genetics is involved in behavior. Now, I know that's counterintuitive. A lot of us think that our behavior is our own and we're deciding it and we're in total control of it. But the fact is, we aren't. And genetics plays a huge role in a lot of this. And that's why some of the misunderstanding about obesity, because people see it as a behavior which they should be able to control. Now, it would be brilliant if that was the case, but it just simply is not. So Robert Plomin, who is one of the best recognized and highly accredited behavioral geneticists on the planet, to quote him, in many ways, the obesity epidemic is a psychological problem. So whilst weight is a physical characteristic, it's a result of behavior. What we eat, how we eat, and how much we exercise is a behavior. So whilst weight is a physical characteristic, it's behavior which is the determinant factor of what weight we are. And so 70% of the differences in weight between people can be explained by DNA differences. So if you were to take 100 people and look at the differences in their body shapes, just grab a random 100 people, you could explain 70% of the differences between that group, between that group's weight through genetics, right? Which means that genetics has an extremely high role to play in your body weight. Now, this doesn't contradict the truism that anyone can lose weight if they stop eating. So it's important when learning about these non-conscious factors that this doesn't take any thing away from whether or not you can do this. So you may be somebody who's predisposed to being overweight, but that doesn't mean that you can't lose weight. All right, if you were taken to sub-Saharan Africa, and given no food, you would starve to death just like anybody else. You would become incredibly malnourished and emaciated. You would become a skeleton just like anybody else, and you would eventually die. There's no way around that. That's just the way. That's the way it works. It doesn't matter what your genetics are doing. If you don't put the food in, you will starve to death. All right. So that is a fact. That's always going to be a fact. And that's just how it is. And so the reason that how we know this is through primarily through adoption and twin studies. And so twin studies is when we take two twins, ideally two who have been separated at birth, and so they don't share the same environment, and then we look at how similar they are. And what we found in twin studies is that even when the twins grow up in different environments with different families, they've both been adopted, they have completely different families with different behaviors, different eating patterns, different lifestyle patterns, that their weight correlates with each other. So the two twins with each other up to 80%. And what we find is that the heritability of weight actually increases over time. So so when the twins are adolescents, when the twins are children, their weight correlates 0.4, so 40%. When they're adolescents, 0.6, so 60%. And when they're fully formed adults, it correlates 0.8, so 80%. More evidence that this is the case comes from adoption studies. So this is studies in which a child has been adopted and now doesn't live with the biological parent. So the child is now in a different environment than it would have been with the biological parents. So they're with the adoptive parents who has their own food environments and their own behaviors and their own attitudes towards food and towards health and exercise, which would be completely different from the biological parents, obviously. And so this child is now growing up in a new environment that it wouldn't otherwise have grown up in had it stayed with the biological parent. So what we would expect if the environment played a high role in your body weight is that the child's weight would correlate with the adopted family's weight, so the adopted parents, because the child will be mimicking the behaviors of the parent, obviously. However, what we found is that we know that children's weight correlates with their biological parents' weight, 0.3, so 30%. But we didn't know how much of that was genetics and how much of that was, nurture, how the parent was raising the child. So with these adoption studies, we were able to look at how much the child's weight correlated with the adopted parents, and that would tell us how much of the child's weight was influenced by the environment that the adopted parent created for the child. And what we found is that the adopted child's weight correlated with the adopted parents, 0. So there was no correlation whatsoever. The environment played no role. And in fact, the adopted child's weight actually still correlated with the parents' weight, the biological parents' weight, by the same amount. So it literally didn't matter that they were in a different environment. Their weight was still 30% correlated with the biological parent. And so that just speaks to the power of genetics in weight gain. And so what does that tell us? So genetics tells us what is and not what could be. So when you're looking at genetics, you're looking at how genetics is representative right now. It doesn't tell you what they're going to be in the future. So genetics are not fate. Genetics speaks to probabilistic outcomes. It doesn't mean that you're fated to be overweight or underweight forever. And in the example that I just gave, no one is immune from starving to death. Some people find it more difficult to lose weight than others, and some people find it more difficult to gain weight than others. And that's all it means. If you're predisposed to weight gain, then it's going to be a bit harder for you to lose weight. If you're predisposed to staying lean, it's going to be a bit harder for you to gain weight. And that's just the way it works. And as I said, it's not your parents' fault either. Nature versus nurture. People would sometimes say maybe it's how they're raised, but we've discovered through adoption studies that the environment has very little effect on individual differences in weight. All right, so it's not about how you were raised, unfortunately. So circadian biology. This is to do with your body clock. So your body is a 24-hour machine. It has a 24-hour clock, which we would have called, and you would have heard the term, body clock. But it's actually 37 trillion body clocks. So each one of your cells, or almost every one of your cells, has its own clock. And each one of them clocks is coordinated by a master clock, which is once again in the hypothalamus region. And it's called the SCN. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is the conductor of the clocks. And so we call it the master clock. So this is this body clock is the reason we feel terrible when traveling to different time zones. This is the cause of jet lag. Your body can get out of sync, and it does. It gets out of sync by. So let's just go on to this now, desynchrony. So when it gets out of sync, it's called circadian desynchrony. So internal clocks falling out of sync. This typically happens when we use screens at night, when we eat in the middle of the night, when we don't get sufficient sunlight when we wake, or if we work rotating shift patterns. So everything that you do during the day, the way you would eat during the day, you would exercise during the day, you would be out in the sunlight during the day. These are all signals to the body that it's time to be awake. Nighttime now, when it's dark, we're less active, we don't eat. These are all signals to the body that it's time to sleep. All right, and so whenever we do stuff that takes us out of that that routine, so when we use screens at nighttime, when we should be when light should be getting less and we're using screens, that's a signal to your brain that it's not time to sleep anymore. When we eat at nighttime, when we eat late at night, or people who would wake up in the middle of the night and eat, that's a signal to your body that it's not sleep time, that it needs to be awake. This is why shift patterns, rotating shift patterns, are so hard on the body. Desynchrony, so circadian desynchrony accelerates weight gain. Rodent studies have shown that when we control for calories, fattening diets appear to be even more fattening when we have circadian desynchrony. So even when calories were controlled for, rodents, it was actually rats in this case, who had been desynchronized, actually gained weight. So their weight gain actually accelerated, even though they were eating the same amount of calories as the rats who weren't desynchronized, who didn't have circadian desynchrony. So lose weight and get healthier by going to sleep. This means that we could stay slimmer and healthier simply by looking after our circadian clock. So just by making sure that our sleep is in check, we can better achieve weight loss goals, right? And this is why your coach normally will put a high priority on stress, as we already talked about, and sleep, all right, because it's incredibly important and it's fundamental to weight loss. So that's it for today, guys. I've attached some books for you to check out. So Stephen Gainey, if you want to find out more about the lipostat system and the stress response system, has a great book called The Hungry Brain. Blueprint by Robert Plomin is one of the best books on genetics you'll ever read. It is absolutely mind-blowing, and it'll change the way you think about everything. Layne Norton has an awesome book. It's called The Contest Prep Guide, which is based around bodybuilding prep, but it is absolutely phenomenal when dealing with macros and total daily energy expenditure. It is absolutely phenomenal. And supplements too. It's a great resource for that. Salt, Sugar and Fat by Michael Moss is a fantastic book on energy density and the implications of the food industry. So this one here is probably a bit more digestible for people not involved in the field, and it has an overarching narrative of food industries basically contriving against the population. So it's a fantastic book too. Highly recommended, these 4 books. And that's about it for today, guys. Download the slides. I've sent you a download file via email for you to download them and keep them. And obviously, this talk is obviously on the website for you to view whenever you want. And I've also added it to your apps. No, I have not. Sorry, apologies. It's on the website, and I'll send the link to you for the talk so that you can view it whenever you want. That is it. Thanks very much, and I'll chat to you again soon.